Good morning. I am so glad to be here for a summer sermon. This is a thing I like to do annually, to come into the pulpit over the summer, and I'm so glad that you're here in person, and I know I've been checking my phone to see who is online. Shout out to my cousin Emily in Boston, as well as everyone else who has joined us this morning. So it was a Thursday morning at the beginning of June. My 16-year-old son, who has approved the telling of this story, was struggling to get out of bed that morning and go to school. It had been a long week, a long month, really, and the end of the school year was tantalizingly close. Despite numerous visits to his bedroom by both parents, he was not out of bed yet. Maybe you have been in this situation. Maybe you have been the parent or caregiver in this situation, feeling increasingly frustrated as the minutes tick by, and you recognize that he is not going to have time to pack his lunch, not going to have time for breakfast, not going to have time to walk to school, not going to make it before the late bell. Maybe you have been the teen in this situation, knowing that your parent is annoyed but also just physically and mentally unable to rouse yourself from the cozy, warm bed, only to what? Go to school? But also feeling guilty because you're a good student and you don't want to get in trouble. So as the parent in this situation, feeling frustrated and annoyed, I decided I needed to teach my kid a lesson. I was going to teach him a lesson about grace. I made him a really nice egg and cheese sandwich on a freshly toasted bagel. I wrapped it in foil so it would stay warm while he made it to school. My wife gave him a ride, and he made it in time. Half an hour later, I got a text from him. It said, "The bagel was very good, by the way, perfectly cooked," with a smiley face. Okay, thank you, Marilyn. Ooh, that's much better, okay. Another story. A couple weeks ago, I was walking our dog, Bailey, through the neighborhood. She did her doggy business, and I reached into the pouch on her leash to pull out a bag to clean it up. The pouch was empty. And I had no one to blame but myself, because I had used it the day before and hadn't replaced the bags. Now, I am a conscientious dog owner and a good neighbor. I was not going to leave Bailey's waste on the ground. As my mind raced to find some solution, could I run home? Could I ask a dog walker for a spare bag? I noticed that about 5 feet away from me, just laying in the street, was a perfectly good, unused dog waste bag. I picked it up and used it. Now, there are a lot of words that I could use to describe that situation. Coincidence, luck, but I could also call it grace, an unexpected but extremely helpful gift from the universe. In Christianity, grace is the unearned, undeserved favor of God. It is a divine gift to us miserable wretches. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Grace is the vehicle through which the divine being of God is able to have a relationship with humans. For Calvinists, grace was a key factor in salvation. The idea that those believers on whom God's grace falls will be saved and spend eternity with God. Early Calvinists believed in a strict definition of predestination, or the idea that God had decided before the beginning of time who would receive grace and go to heaven, and who would be denied grace and go to hell. Our Universalist ancestors said, hold up, or something like that. We like this salvation thing, but wouldn't a loving God want all people to be saved? Wouldn't grace extend to everyone, not just a select few? Universalist preacher Hosea Ballou was one of those early Universalists who pored over biblical texts looking for some justification of the Calvinist idea of predestination. He found nothing that satisfied him and began to preach about God's love and universal grace. Beyond biblical text, Hosea Ballou also pointed to the grace that he had been given by his own loving Father as further evidence that God would not deny God's grace to God's children. In more modern times, the concept of predestination is still prevalent in some Protestant traditions, including Presbyterians and some Baptists. But over time, doctrine has focused more on divine grace being available to those who are followers of Christ, instead of a strict definition of predestination. Of course, some modern UUs believe in this Christian understanding of God and God's grace. But for many UUs, the concept of divine grace may seem irrelevant, unnecessary. Our faith specifically teaches us that we are not wretches in need of divine grace, but instead are beings with inherent worth and dignity. But though I recognize my own worth and dignity, I sometimes feel wretched. I am a good person who sometimes makes bad choices. There is a lot of good in my life, and there is also struggle. Multiple things can be true at the same time. Holding on to grace gives me perspective, connection, and hope. So I'm going to talk about a couple ways that I think UUs can understand grace. We can connect with grace as a spiritual practice. We can use grace as a way to connect with other people. And we can see grace as a kind of hope in hard times. So for me, looking for and giving out grace is one of my most fundamental spiritual practices. And when I talk about grace in context of spiritual practice, I'm talking about noticing those moments that feel like divine grace, like a gift from God or the universe, as well as consciously trying to give grace to others when they have fallen short of expectations. How about another recent moment of grace? It had been a long week, and I had lots of thoughts and worries on my mind. When I'm stressed, I like to walk in the woods because I know it will allow me a chance to clear my head and broaden my perspective beyond the cocoon of my internal thoughts. Bailey and I were walking through the quiet woods in the early morning when we turned a corner and spotted a young fox on the trail in front of us. I gasped in surprise and wonder. Bailey stayed by my side, but the fox still ran when she saw us. As we continued walking, I reflected on that precious moment of breathtaking wonder. It pulled me into the present moment and further into nature. It reset my worried brain. And I wished to see the fox again, though I was pretty sure that a human and a 70-pound dog had likely sent the fox deep into hiding. But then, a moment later, we entered a large clearing and saw the fox on the far edge. I stopped, and Bailey held still. She's a good dog. And we all just watched each other for a long moment. That moment, that second hoped-for sighting of the fox, felt like grace. Noticing these moments, marking them in my mind, deepens my connection with the greater mysteries that surround me. I call that mystery God. Choosing grace also allows me to deepen my connection with others. When I chose grace the morning that my son was struggling to get to school, I was able to model the kind of love and compassion that I want to receive when I'm having a hard day. It was a gift that I was able to give because I received it from my own parents and others. Centering this in my UU theology, I understand the grace that I can give others as part of the interconnectedness that we talk about. If we imagine an interconnected web, I believe that grace works in those connections. It provides a kind of lubricant or elasticity so that even when our connections are pulled and stressed, they can bounce back. If each part of the web, each of us, carries something of the divine within us, we can share divine grace, share grace with others. This is not easy to do, and I'm not suggesting that we automatically offer blind grace to anyone who wrongs us, but I believe that offering grace has the power to transform. Another story. A couple months ago, a person who has been a friend of mine, I will call her Barbara, that is not her name, chose to do something that specifically excluded someone I love from an activity because of my loved one's disability. When I talked to Barbara about this and explained the situation and offered a number of honestly really simple ways to make the activity inclusive, Barbara said it was just too inconvenient to change. She was dug in, and I was really hurt. Time passed, the activity happened with my loved ones sitting out, and I spent a lot of time thinking about this, feeling sad and hurt, but also recognizing a couple things I knew about Barbara's life and perspective. I knew that her choosing convenience over inclusion came from a place of exhaustion, of fear of disappointing other people who had been involved in the planning process, and honestly, some prejudice and misunderstanding about disability. I found myself feeling some compassion for her. It sat there with my hurt and my anger. Multiple things can be true at the same time. A few weeks later, I ran into Barbara at an event. It was awkward. I know she saw me chatting with some friends, but she lingered off to the side. I decided to choose grace. I walked up to her and said hi. She seemed genuinely surprised that I was standing in front of her, but we had a pleasant conversation about the weather. Later that day, her family set up chairs next to mine, and we watched a sporting event together. Now, we're not best friends. I still feel hurt, and am wary of trusting her again. But grace helped me maintain a connection with someone that I didn't really need to let go of completely. It provided a bit of healing and peace. Finally, grace gives us something to connect to in hard times, something like hope. Anne Lamott writes, "The truth is that grace bats last. Even today, even this morning. Grace is spiritual WD-40. Grace is water wings when you think you're going under. Grace is second winds. I promise that grace will meet you exactly where you are right now and will not leave you where it found you." So in baseball, of course, batting last is an advantage given to the home team. If they are not winning by the bottom of the 9th inning, they get one last chance to win the game. Certainly, the home team would prefer to lead the game and not rely on a chance of scoring at the bottom of the 9th, but I imagine it provides some comfort during a hard game to know that they could come back. When I am facing a situation that feels like I'm hitting rock bottom, believing that grace bats last keeps me from getting lost in hopelessness. Help may be summoned. Support may come. The tides may turn, the storm abate. The early Universalists were not just concerned about salvation, they also recognized a basic goodness of existence and the possibility of reconciliation. UU minister Randy Becker wrote, "Because it is not in the nature of things to ultimately suffer, then there is potential for change toward realities that are more life-affirming. Or, said another way, there is potential for grace." I encourage you to play around with grace this summer. Notice those moments of grace in your life. whether breathtaking or mundane. Find ways to share grace with others, and hold on to the possibility of grace, even as we continue to work hard to build beloved community.